much. And I hope I can I always get very nervous when I am doing anything that's outside of my comfort zone, and working in a different operating system always does that to me. So we will see if this is working here. Of course. No. Side one. That's the left button, that's the right button. See, I'm showing it already.
I think you forgot to put the dongle back in, so you're gonna have to use the mouse around.
No, that's fine. We'll do that. Okay, thank you. Or we'll just do this. Okay, now I'm feeling better because I'm just gonna use the keys. All right. So they asked me to talk about professional development, and I really thought long and hard about the kinds of content that I could share with you that would be useful enough for you to take home and start using right away. And I thought, you know, if I was this crew, maybe I would want someone to say, ooh, here's some really good curricula you guys could just take and use. Oh, here's a good thing from this group, and here's this, and here's that. And as I got to thinking about that, I thought, you know, that's only as good as those things are relevant now for whatever it is that I'm thinking of at the time that I'm selecting them. I recognize that for me, it's a much richer matrix, and there's lots of different reasons that you choose or you don't choose training and technical assistance that aid in professional development. So I thought to myself, maybe what I really should be doing is providing you guys with a framework and a way to be thinking about professional development. So that's what I'm going to do today, and we'll see how that goes. But I want to put this first into some context. So as you can see, I've got this metaphor already of all of these keys. And the key to accessibility isn't a single thing. It's a lot of stuff. So I'm hoping you either have or you are on your way to having institutional leadership on the issue of accessibility. If you don't have that, that's really where you need to go back and you need to start. Do we have that upper tier support for not making a class accessible, but transforming the enterprise? Because that's really what we're talking about, isn't it, Kelly? And isn't it, Sean? That's really what we're talking about. Do you, or are you on your way to having a policy that is articulated? And I don't mean at the level of ITLS, yeah, it's our policy, it's our guidance to do things in a way that conform to WCAG 2, actually it's 2.x now because we're at a 1, AA. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about an institutional policy that says it's the policy of this institution that blah, blah, blah. Because if you don't have that top tier leverage, how are you ever going to get to those recalcitrant faculty that say, I'm not doing that, or let's bring in unions? Where's that collective bargaining? But institutional policy is different because nobody has the opportunity to say, you know, I'm just not that into the training that y'all did on sexual harassment. I'm not going to do it, and I really don't care about the topic, and you can't make me. Well, technically, we can, because it's part of a policy doctrine at this institution that you're a part of. So be thinking about those levers of change. The next is strategy. For institutions that take accessibility seriously, or for online parts of the institution that take this seriously, there's an overarching strategy. It's not just a faculty member learning how to do it and doing it, and that's a critical component. But this is how we're going to eat this beast. We all know it's one bite at a time, right? But what does that bite look like? I think about being a kid. You go to your Easter basket, you get out your chocolate bunny. What's your strategy? Is it the ear first? Is it the foot first? How are you going to consume this big monster? So having an overall idea of what your strategy will be is important in this. Of course, I'm thinking you're already coming at this having some resources. Now, OLC will be part of the resources. OLC and WCET have started a year of accessibility, and we were just talking about the fact that it shouldn't just be a year, because if it's a culture change, this is going to take a lot more than a year. But there's a lot of resources that are out there that will help different people that are part of your institutional culture in figuring out what needs to happen. You know, whether that's the tools that'll help the procurement people or the tools that'll help the HR people in their quest for, you know, top-level accessibility. Certainly, I'm thinking at this point you would also have a really strong communications and, dare I say, marketing plan that's going out to your own campus community. You know, we've got to start making the messaging that goes out to faculty, that goes out to staff, that helps them understand why the institution is making this big shift and what their role is as part of this. This can't just drop down quickly from the sky. This, well, the communications is part of your overall strategy as well, helping, you know, entice people to make sure that their excellent teaching opportunities are available for everybody. Of course, in my mind, I'm thinking that all of this stuff is happening in the context of data. So there is monitoring that's going on, there are database decisions that are happening, all of this stuff is happening. So, and you're saying, yeah, right, Cyndi. But there really are some institutions that are doing this. So I know there are a couple in the room, so how many of you guys have a policy and you're on your path here, you're kind of doing some of this? Good, 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 okay. So you know that when we're talking about professional development, that is just one piece of this puzzle. It's got to be nested in all of these other bits for this to be something that's really going to work. So, ergo the key metaphor here. We need to line up a few more keys on this. This is one of my favorite sayings, one of my favorite Will Rogers, you know, statements. If you find yourself in a hole, the first thing to do is stop digging. And I think for a lot of you and a lot of your institutions, you are in an accessibility hole right now. And what do you need to do? Well, according to Will Rogers, you need to stop digging. When you think about the content that is put onto your campus you know, institutional site or instructional site by folks that are not web developers. Well, of course, there's a lot of IT folks here and designers here. So you guys all get a pass. At our campus, faculty members have access to Canvas, and if I'm teaching, guess what I do? I go in and I develop my course. End of story. There's no review, there's no getting it through anybody. I put in what I want, I teach it, it's my class, leave me alone. I don't know how many of your campuses are kind of like that, but that's the reality that I live with. And for our campus to get out of this hole, guess who needs to learn how to not mess it up? It's faculty, it's staff. If our institution, my institution, wants to get out of the hole and wants to stop digging, they're going to have to help me learn what it is that I need to do, which kind of leads us to my slide. This acts as my own advanced organizer, and this is what I want to spend most of our time talking about. So we've got a ton of challenges with professional development, and I'm not even talking about things like unions. How many of you guys are in union states? Not a single one? Well, oh, one, two, okay, oh, two, okay. I started to say I don't need to talk about that anymore, but I don't know, should I say my condolences, or is that like just a happy thing because everyone gets on board and you just move along? I don't know, one of the two. But they're not saying anything, because they're sure Jimmy Hoffa was buried somewhere in Missouri. So, all right. So the challenges in accessibility, and I'm not even going to talk about the broader challenge and broader importance of universal design, which is what Sean was talking about earlier. I'm just talking about, you know, developing to the technical standards that are required at this point in time that will lead you to not repeat what Kelly and Phoenix had to go through, which was the no-CR complaint. But on your campus, who needs what kind of professional development? And then is this just added to their plates? How about the effectiveness of those development efforts? And what about the logistics that surround them? These are all important considerations. How do you really consider ongoing efforts over time? What about the motivation? This is so critical. The motivation to get people to change their behavior or maybe even show up or engage in professional development. And then finally, you know, what are we doing in terms of monitoring the outcomes of this? So this is what I'm going to spend time on, and then we've got lots of good conversation after that. All right, who needs what? So if every member of your institution, your enterprise, has some responsibility, and I contend that they do, then everybody essentially needs some kind of training and some kind of support. Now, the problem is it's different. If I have purely web developers, people that live in pointy bracket land, write and code, that's what they do, they need some support and training in HTML and CSS. They need to understand the issues with ARIA landmarks. They need a level of technical training and support that faculty members aren't going to need, and maybe that a number of you wouldn't need. But what about your administration? What are the things that they need? Gosh, they need to have things brought into them that will keep their eye keenly focused on this issue, whether there are changes in the legal landscape, whether there are changes to the technical standard, you know, all kinds of things. Let me go to a faculty member. Well, they're going to need specific things that are tailored to what it is that they do as well. So maybe they spend most of their time creating, I don't know, Word, PowerPoint, Excel documents and uploading them into the LMS. They need to know what to do to those essentially office products to make those accessible. If everything is being done to fix them on the backside through the design team, what an incredible waste of resources that is when we can teach them how to do what they need to do on the front side. But even some staff members need to know that as well. So staff members will routinely create documents that get uploaded onto the institutional web. Well, who's attending to that? Because that is a liability. As a staff member, if I go to our HR site and I go to where I can look at our different benefits package and decide medically, am I going to go with the white plan or the blue plan this year? Those are documents that are created for us. If those aren't accessible, I could complain. I could start a thing. A lot of people at our institutions have control over things that end up online, and eventually you've got to suss out who all those folks are. But even some people that don't directly put content up online are also responsible. So do people in your purchasing office, do they understand what their roles and responsibilities are to the effective implementation of accessibility policy? If they don't know what's the best language to put into an RFP or an RFA, if they don't know how to review a contract and negotiate with a vendor to make sure that accessibility is either part of the contract or they've got a roadmap that's appended to the contract, if they don't know how to look at what is in front of them as the vendor is pitching their wares, then they're not going to be able to make some of the best decisions. Now, a lot of times it's not actually those purchasing officials, but it's somebody that's brought into that loop that helps do that. But those are folks that need to understand some evaluation metrics. Human resources, oh my goodness, could we please just get every technical job on campus, can we please put knowledge and skills in web accessibility as a recommended requirement, as a preferred requirement, not even recommended at this point until we've got more professionals out there that know this. But everybody at the enterprise has some touch to what's happening and ending up in an online world. So we've got to figure out who all these folks are, and we've got to figure out how to help them. You'll see this last category I have too, students. Well, how many of your students are employed on your campuses? How many of those students in classes are required as part of the class to do some online collaborative stuff or just to post some online stuff that then is intended for consumption by the rest of the class? So we've got to be thinking about this broadly, and trust me, there are excellent solutions. Campuses have been doing just some amazing, innovative stuff. I look to, on this last one, Madison, Wisconsin, again, I keep throwing, is there anyone here from Madison? No, darn it. They've got some really cool stuff going on there. Actually, I'm just going to share this one and then I'm going to move on. For the students, every student that takes a technical job, you can't even apply for a technical job on campus until you have taken and passed a certain course that they offer. You know, it's like a month-long course that they offer on a rolling basis. You can't even apply for one of those jobs. So they're only hiring students that have already been trained in accessibility. Like, isn't that brilliant? Isn't that brilliant? They have stopped the digging on that hole, which is, we've got a lot of student employees that are just making things worse. Well, they just made it better for themselves. Okay. And then you have to ask yourself, how deep do you go on some of this stuff? There is an article on the NCDAE site, Reflections on Accessibility Expectations. I think you guys had it in your pre-read. Faculty are expected to do what? And while many of us would agree that for some of the very simple things, like, alternative text in a Word or a PowerPoint document, yeah, we're good that that's something faculty are required to do. And we're pretty good that we're going to expect them to convert from a good solid Word document over into PDF. What if it's a complex table? Now if they're into PDF, we know that Word does a horrible job with header and row issues that don't pull over into PDF. So now are we saying if our line in the sand is that faculty are responsible for their own content, end of story, that's what they got to do. Are we now saying that all faculty members need to understand markup and need to know how to go into a complex table and mark it up after they've converted it to PDF? I hope we're not saying that, because that's when faculty start to rebel. Because there's no way, given all the things that they do, that they're going to be able to succeed at this one. Are we saying that for, I'll stick with PDF for a second, that's the whipping boy du jour. If you've got a complex form that was developed out of registration or financial assistance, that the staff member that did that needed to understand how to associate labels with the form label, the form with the label. I don't think that's what we mean. I think that there are places we can agree people have to take responsibility for their content, and other places where we have to agree people need help and support. The tough thing is that those are institution by institution decisions. So it goes right back to your culture, it goes right back to who you are, it goes right back to what is going to fly and what is, as Kelly says, and I love this, the hard no on campus. So be thinking of that as we move along here. I pulled this out of Portland Community College's material. They have fabulous stuff. And if any of you guys have been in the accessibility world, you know of PCC's work. I just couldn't point people to them more quickly. So they have a beautiful, you can see this is page 12 of a wonderfully accessible PDF document, I've got to tell you. And the pamphlet goes out to their campus community. And on page 12 of their pamphlet, who's responsible for what? So they've made those decisions and they've spelled them out. Now, why do I have this here? It's just to reinforce the knowledge or reinforce the message that you need to be very explicit. You need to have made those decisions. You need to be communicating that out to other folks. And sorry for that really poor contrast. I have a feeling that that happened when it got converted over into Google. So I actually went in and I did a change to make that white because I knew that that contrast was really bad. So see, now you guys get an opportunity to see what happens when you have bad contrast. Some of you probably almost can't see that link. And it looks like it changed the size by default too, so you probably can't read the link. But anyway, once you go into resources, you can probably change it on your own as well. Okay, so be explicit on who needs what kind of training and how deep their training will go. All right, is training added to their plate? And institutions really are doing this very, very differently. And I suspect a lot of you guys are already struggling with some of this right now. So at some institutions, frankly, they're adding the training piece right into the role statement. So it is an expectation. It is something that's followed over time, but it's right there. And then others are providing either a compensation or release time. So what they'll do very often is they'll have, kind of a launch on accessibility. And again, sometimes it's the whole campus. Sometimes what they do is say, all right, we're taking College of Ed this year, and then humanities and sciences next, and then, move through the campus that way. Others will take, the top tier classes in terms of enrollment, and then all the support services, and then, and do it in a certain way. But then that provides a nice rollout over several years, and you learn as you do. So oftentimes it's not everybody, but sometimes they'll do it this way. Let's see, is there anybody that's taking this in a little bit different way, where you are requiring folks to, you're trying to help them help you, right, through the training. But there's always a place where you have to ask them to do it, and that's a lot of times when you get that initial resistance, because I can't, I've got, what, did you have a comment back there? I didn't know if you, that was just hair. Okay, just ignore. But something to think about. How is it that you can persuade the top tier administration or the decision makers to introduce the knowledge of training and supports in a way that will be accepted? I mean, it's kind of like, I don't know, the flu shot. We all don't like them. It hurts a tiny little bit, but then it's over. And then you're hopefully not going to get sick for at least that year, if you did it right. All right. We've got to also be thinking about the effectiveness of professional development efforts. And we've got to know on the front side how we're matching that. And I talked about that before. So what are we training? Are we training HTML? Are we training Word documents? Are we training on InDesign or Excel? Are we training about procurement or about evaluation? I see oftentimes institutions that will offer an accessibility training. What that generally is comprised of is we're going to spend a little time just explaining what accessibility is, why it's important at this institution. And then I spend another chunk of time giving a few, but very generic tips for things people can do. Well, that may not help me, if I'm a web developer, know how to operationalize all of the POUR principles that come out of WCAG. It may not help me understand everything that needs to happen in PowerPoint if I'm a faculty member. So you've got to be thinking through, is the training a match to what it is that that person needs to do their job within the strategy and the policy that your institution has? Okay. And you've got to make sure that it very, very, very much is a match to what you're expecting. So how often have we participated in the old, spray and pray training, which is, I guess, a variant of what I'm doing here, right? I'm just going to talk at you for a while, and I'm going to hope that you walk away with some knowledge. Well, what if I don't want to pray that you're walking away, and maybe I don't want you to walk away with knowledge, I want you to walk away with skills. Is my training a match for that? And I feel almost a little embarrassed saying these kinds of things to this group because of all of the instructional designers and faculty members that we have here. You guys could be giving this part of the talk. You guys know how critical it is to look at what that outcome is and how to make sure that the pedagogy that you use and the content that you use is a match and will get you to that outcome. So again, think, if I want faculty members to be able to demonstrate skills in accessibility of all the Office products, is my training a match to that? It's something to consider. If you're asking faculty to come in for a workshop and they get a lot of demonstrations and they go away, that may not be the best match. You may have done a fabulous job increasing awareness. You may have done a fabulous job increasing some knowledge. You may not have gotten to that skill level, which is exactly where you need them to be. Okay, let's see. I think I pretty much, this last bullet point kind of speaks for itself. So, if I create a training that then has quizzes at the end, well, that's increasing what? Knowledge, right? If I want to determine if I've actually had an effect on someone's skill, I need to have them submit something so that I can assess that. And that becomes problematic when you start looking at how many people you're talking about trying to affect. How many folks do we have here that have faculty and staff at their institution over 500? Okay, how about over 1,000? How about over 2,000? So somewhere in there, right? That's a lot of people. If you're asking that many people to be delivering products that then someone is essentially evaluating for feedback, wow. And we're not talking about a training. I mean, think about this again for faculty and staff. It's usually going to be Word, PowerPoint, PDF, and then it may be Excel, it may be Stata, it may be InDesign, it may be, we could go right down a lot of the things that are used most commonly on your institution. The scale of this is just mind-numbing. But just be very sure that you know what it is that you're matching to and how it is that a training that either you develop or that you outsource is or isn't a match to what it is that you do. Okay, so some logistics to think about. If you're talking about professional development for your campus community or for your online, department, are you assuming it's going to be online or is it face-to-face? And all the other things that I said before, loop back in. Well, if it's face-to-face, hopefully it's not spray and pray, but you don't know. And then what about internal capacity? Certainly, you can bring external experts in that can do this kind of stuff. But if you're not building capacity over time, then you're kind of hitching your horse to outsourcing this. Now, I've got to say, as a group that gets outsourced to, I can make an argument that maybe that's as cost effective because of the changes that are being made. We just recently launched an online 4-week course, and it's done every single month. We did July's, and then we had a change in one of the pieces of software we cover. We did August, and there was another change in another one, and we had to respond to both of those. And then this October, you know, a lot of stuff is happening with 360. So a lot of stuff has to get changed. And I think about those campuses that have a designer, developer create stuff like this, where things are changing and shifting. Standards are changing and shifting. We just, WCAG 2.0 just went to WCAG 2.1. Well, you know, where are these changes and shifts, and how is it that the institution, if they're taking care of this internally, are responding? With that said, at least it's been our kind of standard that we only want to work really with people that don't want to be working with us over time. We want to work with folks that build internal capacity, but there is an interesting dynamic and an interesting argument. You know, at what point is it better for the institution to have that internal capacity, or to, you know, outsource some of these things? I don't know. Another piece of the logistics is if you need verification. Now, someone in here had an OCR complaint, and I forget who that was. Ah, you did. So I'm so sorry to have the feds breathing down your neck. But because you do, and of course, everybody else, there, but for the grace of God, go all of you, because you could get a complaint tomorrow. But you probably need to keep track of who it is that's getting trained. So you need to figure out some verification. We have now trained 50% of our faculty. We've now trained 80% of our faculty. I mean, there's a whole thing that they've got to do, a different hellhole that you've jumped into on this. Some folks, of course, they enjoy getting those extra certifications or badges, or, you know, whatever it is, because that's portable. That's something they can take along with them. But in a professional development capacity, you want to be thinking through that. Is this something that I want to make sure I'm looking to or for? And of course, it doesn't mean you can't provide your own internal certification. There's nothing here saying it has to be from an external body. But even just, you know, keeping track of how folks are doing. We've kind of already talked about the scale. You know, are we talking about providing professional development to 100 or 3,000? And what does that mean? And what does that mean as we are, you know, continually in flux here? We're always getting new faculty as other people go. We're always getting new staff as other people go. The other thing I'm going to mention here, and I didn't put it on here, what happens if you have shifts in personnel at that function level? The person who's teaching it, the person who designed maybe an online content, what will the institution do if that person leaves? So thinking through all of this is really important. And then the last is that thing itself accessible? You would be quite shocked, I think, at how many courses, online courses in accessibility are not themselves accessible. It's been a shocker for me. Okay, how are we doing? All right. So just wanting to make the point that this is the training in professional development or training in technical assistance is an ongoing thing. It's never a one and done. You don't say, okay, we've now trained everybody and we're good. I would advise people in the professional development to make sure that they're creating systems of technical assistance. So, you know, I threw up some examples here. Some campuses have added accessibility into their help desk. So in the same way that a faculty or a student can call and say, I'm trying to figure this out, they make sure that one of the staff that they always have available during the hours of the help desk is someone that is very fluent in accessibility and can assist. We've seen some campuses that will put, they'll train up certain folks in departments or in units, and then that person is available to a lot of folks. So on our campus, for example, they took a junior faculty who was very enthusiastic about accessibility. Well, let me tell you this. They gave her summer salary where she learned all about accessibility, and then as she started the next year, she did, at every faculty meeting, once a month, She gave a 15-minute thing on a tip for all of the faculty in that department. And she was available to anybody at any time to come down and talk about problems that they were having with accessibility. That was enormously successful because she was approachable, she was right there, she was enthusiastic, she was new. She was cheap because, you know, summer salary of a young professional is not too bad. I've seen that work as well with grad students too. But of course, then they loop out, which can be an issue. Let's see. We've also seen some campuses that do it, instead of by departments, they kind of do it by peer groups. So maybe a half a dozen faculty members across the institution are trained in accessibility, but they are ready. It's kind of open door. They'll be happy to help someone figure out what to do with this, PowerPoint issue, and which might be different from staff members, which might be different from web developers. So making sure that you've got some technical assistance that's available after that training is really critical. I will say that establishing an online community of practice is great, but you guys all know what happens there. None of us want to appear to be the idiots that we all really are. So you set this thing up, and you know you want it to be searchable. You want to archive all these great questions and all these great answers, and nobody comes. You know, if you build it, they will come. Well, not if it's a community of practice that's showing my ignorance, you know. So be wary of that as a solution. And yet, I've got to say that there are some brilliant ways it's used. I think of WCET and OLC and the conversations that they're starting to have now on accessibility. But each of those professionals is risking a little bit as they put themselves out there. So that may or may not work for your own campus. Okay. Motivation. This is one of the topics, one of the breakouts. And we've got to realize that after people have received some training, and hopefully even after they've received some technical assistance, there's a very, very, very different thing that happens here. Can they do it, yes or no? But then do they do it? So at some point in time, you have to answer the question of motivation. Now, we could be talking about the motivation to even get to training. That's an interesting thing. You guys might want to talk about that. But after they've received that, and those the technical assistance is available, what's motivating them to continue to do that? So it's something to kind of think about. What we're seeing across the nation is pretty much these three models. There's the police model. I call it the Gestapo model. You know, we have a policy, we have a standard, we provide you with training, and we're periodically checking. And anyone that's in violation gets, called to the principal's office. So there's the police model. I think more and more people prefer to think of the fireman model, to be honest with you. Who doesn't love firemen, right? And they do fire education at the drop of a hat. And they'll run into burning buildings and save that baby at any time of the day or night. So if you can go to the police the police department or the fireman's house, where would you go? Where would you want to go? So maybe there are ways to soften this police model by thinking of it as a fireman model, but we've not yet really seen that. And then there's the gatekeeper model. I've actually been in sessions today where I've heard a lot of folks have this model right now, which is you give us your content and we're going to evaluate it. If it meets our standards, and not just accessibility, but other things too, then it'll get online, or then you'll get paid, or then. But accessibility is part of a gatekeeping function. So that, and I'm not throwing shade at the gatekeeper model, but it is one of the things that is part of what may be motivating folks to get on board with this. And then, of course, there's the good citizen model, where you really make sure that folks understand what the issue is. So we're talking about civil justice here, right? We're talking, or social justice. We're talking about the ability of folks to participate or not participate in society. We're talking about the value of education. We're talking about the reason they got into education to begin with. So a lot of times, in a lot of campus cultures, this argument is going to provide sufficient motivation for most, maybe not for all. But what is it that I kind of recommend? Well, I recommend creating a carrot environment, that you're extolling the positive reasons that they should be doing this work, that you're providing all the adequate supports that they need to succeed in all of this. But then at the same time, there is this overarching policy environment, so they know what the expectation is. And as issues occur, the assumption is we must not have given them the proper supports to succeed, so we'll give them more support, and then if there's a problem, then they get a little more support. Where I've seen this work well is it's almost, and I hate to say it this way, but it's almost a 3 strikes you're out kind of thing. We assume it's us 3 different times, and each time you get more support, more support, more support. But then at the end of the day, if it's an issue of recalcitrance, if it's an issue of just heels dug in, you've got to know where you're going with this. So I would recommend that before you even start this, you have a sense of where this ends. And I would contend if it's part of a policy document, it ends in the same place any other violation of institutional policy would end, which is probably in a personnel manner. But I would still say you always err on the side of we didn't get it right for that person. We didn't provide the proper supports for that person. So let's try it again. And let's try it again and again and again before, things start to close in on them. And maybe they lose some responsibilities each time, I don't know. But it's an interesting conversation because it goes right back to what your institutional culture happens to be. All right, monitoring outcomes, I've just got a couple minutes here. I would hope that at this point in time, folks are not, if they're providing a training, that they're not just asking about, satisfaction with it. I would hope that there is some way to look at a big initiative on training and professional development and with a delay on how is our accessibility? How accessible is the content that's uploaded into our LMS right now? Is it getting better? If it's not, then you've got to ask yourself, what's happened to our training? Why shouldn't the data be getting better as we're launching this stuff out? That's one of the reasons a lot of times people will put it kind of in a little egg. We're going to train the people from this department as a pilot, and then we're going to see if things got better, and then we're going to learn from that, and then we're going to broaden it out a little bit more. So be thinking about how the training is actually tied into the actual outcomes of accessibility in your programs, in your courses. And certainly knowing the data that you want to collect is going to be important. And knowing how that's going to improve your training, your professional development overall. Okay, so what is out there? There's just a ton of stuff that's out there right now. I could have given you lists and lists, but the problem with me giving you lists is that it's based on maybe things that I would match that you wouldn't. So it kind of wouldn't make sense doing that. But search web accessibility training, look at stuff. There certainly are, if you just popped, web accessibility training right now into your browser, you'd just be surprised at how much stuff is coming out. And I think it's just out of time, but I got to do this last little slide. Oh, and at the back table when you guys go out, it's the table we had our food on. I try to not be vendor-y, but WebAIM did just launch our own, it's a document accessibility course. So I got permission from OLC to put a little flyer about that at the back, if anyone's interested. But I want to leave you guys. Now, this is gonna tell me a lot about the age of this group, because I believe a lot of you have seen the herding cats video, right? It's probably about a 15-year-old video at this point in time. EDS did this funny video on a Super Bowl thing. But I think it's a perfect analogy. What y'all are going to begin to engage in, if you're part of personal development in higher ed, is literally herding cats. So, enjoy.
This man right here is my great-grandfather. He's the first cat herder in our family.
Herding cats. Don't let anybody tell you it's easy.
Anybody can herd cattle. Holding together 10,000 half-wild short hairs, well, that's another thing altogether.
Being a cat herder is probably about the toughest thing I think I've ever done.
I got this one this morning, right here, and if you look at his face, it's just ripped to shreds, you know?
You see the movies, you hear the stories, I'm living a dream. Not everyone can do what we do.
I wouldn't do nothing else.
It ain't an easy job, but when you bring a herd into town and you ain't lost a one of them, ain't a feeling like it in the world.
Ah, that's fun. I just love that one. It really is a perfect little metaphor. And gosh darn it. Goodness. Okay, we're going to just go one last. Maybe we aren't. Okay. Oh, there we go. So I just want to say good luck on your professional development efforts. There's a lot of supports out there for those of you that are going to be doing this. Please make sure that you're matching what you want. And by the way, I just have to make this last comment as you rush me off the stage here. That was funny for me to look at the captioning on that, because it wasn't actually captioned. It was an auto-generated thing, and I hope you all saw what a big nightmare that was. Don't ever use auto-captioning out of YouTube. That's my last sentence.
You know, we should actually have... I